The imperial palace of Aurelian floated above a sea of clouds the color of molten gold. From orbit, it looked less like a palace and more like a small city carved from starlight itself. Towering crystal spires pierced the heavens. Bridges of luminous alloy connected vast terraces where diplomats, nobles, military officers, and scholars from hundreds of worlds walked beneath banners bearing the silver sun of the Aurelian Empire. To most species in the galaxy, it was a symbol of power. To Princess Lyra Aurelia Vallon, it was a prison. Your Highness, please return to your lesson. The young princess ignored the pleading voice behind her and continued climbing the decorative support arch that overlooked the eastern gardens. The tutor sighed. Lyra smiled. Another victory. 3 meters above the polished floor, she balanced effortlessly on the curved structure while the elderly academic below looked moments away from cardiac failure. Princess, he cried. I am studying gravity. That is not today's subject. It is now. The tutor pinched the bridge of his nose. The palace guards exchanged glances. Everyone knew how this would end. It always ended the same way. A tutor arrived. The tutor attempted to educate Princess Lyra. The tutor lost. The tutor resigned. The cycle repeated. Lyra was only 17 standard years old, but she had already driven away historians, scientists, diplomats, military strategists, economists, and one unfortunate philosopher who had lasted less than 2 days. The emperor called her spirited. The empress called her stubborn. The palace staff called her impossible. Lyra personally preferred talented. After all, making highly educated adults surrender was practically an art form. The elderly tutor finally gave up. His shoulders slumped. Defeat. Again. Lyra grinned. Excellent lesson today. The old man stared at her. Then he slowly turned and walked away. The guards looked sympathetic. One of them actually whispered a prayer. Lyra laughed so hard she nearly fell off the arch. 3 days later, the tutor resigned. Just like all the others. The replacement arrived the following week. Naturally, Lyra prepared for war. She expected another academic. Perhaps a decorated military officer. Maybe a political advisor. Instead, she found herself staring at the most ordinary person she had ever seen. A human. Not just a human. A boring human. He stood quietly in the library classroom while palace servants finished arranging equipment. Average height. Average build. Simple dark clothing. Short brown hair.
No medals. No noble ornaments.
No visible signs of importance. He looked more like a maintenance worker than someone trusted with educating the heir to an interstellar empire. Lyra frowned. You're my tutor? The human nodded. Yes. That's all. That's all. She blinked. That was disappointing. At least the military officers usually tried to impress her. The human simply stood there. Calm. Patient. Almost annoyingly comfortable. What happened to the last one? She asked. He resigned. Do you know why? You drove him away. The answer came instantly.
No hesitation.
No fear. No attempt at diplomacy. Just simple truth. Lyra narrowed her eyes. Interesting. Most adults avoided speaking honestly around royalty. This one apparently didn't care. And what makes you think you'll last longer? The human considered the question. Experience. That was somehow even more irritating. Experience teaching princesses? No. Then experience doing what? A faint smile touched his face. Dealing with difficult people. The guards nearby suddenly looked away, trying not to laugh. Lyra gasped. Did you just insult me? No. You absolutely did. I answered your question. For several seconds silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, Lyra laughed. The human smiled slightly. The lesson began. His name was Elias Ward. And he was impossible. Not because he was strict. Not because he was brilliant. Not because he was intimidating. He simply refused to react. When Lyra interrupted lessons, Elias adapted. When she changed subjects, Elias followed. When she attempted distractions, Elias turned them into teaching opportunities. Nothing worked. Every trap failed. Every argument somehow became a lesson. Weeks passed. Then months. For the first time in her life, a tutor remained. That alone should have been enough to make him unusual. But Lyra gradually noticed something stranger. Something she couldn't explain. One afternoon she left a lesson early and crossed the western security corridor. The hallway was heavily guarded. Imperial sentinels lined both sides. Elite warriors. Veterans. Some had fought wars across entire sectors. They were not the type to be intimidated. Yet as Elias approached from the opposite direction, something odd happened. The guards moved. Not dramatically. Not consciously. Just a subtle shift. A step to the side. A slight clearing of space. As if instinctively making room. Lyra stopped walking. The guards didn't salute him. They didn't acknowledge him. But they moved. Every single one. Elias continued past without seeming to notice. The moment he was gone, the formation returned to normal. Lyra stared. That was strange. Very strange. Because soldiers respected rank, power, authority, fear. Elias possessed none of those things. At least none she could see. Later she asked Captain Varen, commander of palace security. The massive reptilian officer frowned. You noticed? Yes. The captain seemed uncomfortable. That alone was surprising. Very little made Varen uncomfortable. What is it? Lyra pressed. I don't know. You don't know? No. The answer sounded genuine. The captain crossed his arms. We simply move. Why? I couldn't tell you. That answer bothered him almost as much as it bothered her. The mystery only deepened. Whenever Lyra asked about Elias, nobody had answers. Where had he come from? Unknown. Who recommended him? Classified. What had he done before teaching? Unclear. How had he received palace clearance? Nobody seemed certain. The records existed. Yet somehow they revealed almost nothing. A few years here. A few years there. Employment histories with gaps. Missing details. Missing explanations. Missing context. It was as if someone had carefully erased large portions of his life. The more Lyra investigated, the more questions appeared. And Elias never volunteered information. Whenever she asked about his past, he redirected the conversation. Always politely. Always smoothly. Always successfully. Which only made her more determined. Several weeks later, Lyra finally found something. It happened entirely by accident. Their lesson that day focused on ancient human civilizations. Rain hammered against the palace windows. Thunder rolled through distant clouds. The library was nearly empty. Elias stood beside a holographic projector while discussing historical conflicts. As he adjusted the display, his sleeve slid upward. Only for a second. Maybe less. But it was enough. Lyra froze. Scars. Not one. Not two. Dozens. White lines crossed his forearm. Old wounds. Deep wounds. The kind left by blades. Explosions. Combat. Her eyes widened. Then she saw something else. Partially hidden beneath the scars. A tattoo. Dark ink. Military. Not decorative. Not artistic. A symbol. Sharp angles surrounding a black star. The design looked ancient. Dangerous. Deliberate. And instantly recognizable as something created by soldiers. Before she could speak, Elias noticed where she was looking. For the first time since she had met him, his expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. The warmth vanished. The smile disappeared. His eyes became cold. Not angry. Not frightened. Cold. Like a door had suddenly closed. In one smooth motion he pulled the sleeve back down. Covering the scars. Covering the tattoo. Covering the mystery. The silence stretched between them. Lyra's heart beat faster. Elias. The human looked at her. Calm once more. What is it, princess? But now she knew. The most boring human in the palace wasn't boring at all. And whatever he had been before becoming a tutor, he was trying very hard to leave it buried. The mystery of the tattoo should have made Princess Lyra fear Elias Ward. Instead, it made her curious. And curiosity, she had discovered, was far more dangerous. For nearly a month after seeing the scar-covered symbol hidden beneath his sleeve, she attempted to uncover the truth. The results were infuriating. Every question led nowhere. Every inquiry produced another dead end. Even the Imperial archives, which contained detailed records stretching back thousands of years, held almost nothing useful. His birthplace existed. His citizenship records existed. His employment certifications existed. Yet the years between them seemed fragmented. Pieces were missing. Entire chapters of his life appeared to have vanished. Someone had hidden them, or erased them, or both. The realization bothered her far more than she expected, because Elias did not seem like someone hiding from justice. If anything, he seemed like someone hiding from attention. That was a very different thing. The following morning, Lyra arrived at her lesson determined to finally force answers from him. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of the palace gardens carrying a shovel. She stared at it, then at Elias, then back at the shovel. What exactly does this have to do with imperial leadership? The human continued digging without looking up. Everything. That is not an answer. It is. It absolutely is not. Elias placed another young sapling into the soil. The early morning sunlight reflected across the palace gardens. Dozens of workers moved among the flowering terraces. Maintenance drones floated overhead. The scent of silverleaf blossoms drifted through the air. Lyra crossed her arms. You are avoiding the question. I am teaching the lesson. You brought me outside. Yes. You gave me gardening equipment. Also yes. I am the future ruler of the largest empire in known space. Correct. And your lesson is planting trees. Excellent, Elias said. You're finally paying attention. Lyra groaned loudly. The nearby gardeners tried, and failed, to hide their amusement. An hour later she hated the lesson. 2 hours later she hated it even more. 3 hours later her shoulders hurt. Her hands were dirty. Her royal robes were ruined. And she was convinced Elias was secretly enjoying her suffering. The human sat beside one of the newly planted trees while drinking water. You look unhappy. I despise this lesson. Good. She blinked. What? You remember difficult lessons. That's ridiculous. Is it? Lyra opened her mouth. Paused. Closed it again. Unfortunately, he had a point. She hated that. Elias pointed toward the small line of newly planted trees stretching across the garden. How long before those reach maturity? She frowned. A century, perhaps. Will you benefit from them? No. Then why plant them? Lyra looked at the trees. For a moment she didn't answer. Because she already knew. Future generations. Future citizens. Future leaders. People she would never meet. People who would enjoy the shade long after she was gone. Elias smiled faintly. Leadership is often investing in things you'll never live to see. The words settled quietly between them.
No lecture.
No dramatic speech. Just a simple truth. Yet somehow it carried more weight than entire volumes of political theory. For reasons she couldn't explain, she remembered it. The lessons continued. But they never resembled normal lessons. One day Elias brought her to the lower residential districts beneath the palace. Another day he took her to military hospitals. Then food distribution centers. Then manufacturing complexes. Then refugee housing districts. The future empress found herself meeting people she had rarely considered before. Workers. Technicians. Families. Veterans. Farmers. Engineers. Ordinary citizens. At first she assumed Elias wanted her to observe them. Instead he made her listen. Really listen. That proved far more difficult. One afternoon an elderly dock worker spoke for nearly an hour about transportation delays affecting local trade routes. Lyra nearly died of boredom. Until Elias asked a simple question. What happens if nobody fixes the problem? The worker answered immediately. Food shipments slow. And then. Prices rise. And then. Families suffer. The answer changed everything. Suddenly the conversation wasn't about shipping routes. It was about people. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Leadership wasn't about policies. Policies were merely tools. Leadership was about consequences. Human consequences. Alien consequences. Real lives. Real struggles. Real sacrifices. For the first time, imperial governance stopped feeling abstract. Weeks passed. Slowly, something unexpected happened. Lyra stopped trying to sabotage lessons. Not because Elias forced her. Because she genuinely wanted to hear what came next. The change shocked everyone, including herself. The palace staff noticed first, then the guards, then the royal advisors, then eventually the emperor himself. One evening during a formal banquet, Emperor Valen studied his daughter from across the table. "You've changed." Lyra looked up from her meal. "No, I haven't. You attended 6 council briefings voluntarily." Silence. The emperor smiled. His daughter looked horrified. The empress laughed openly. "He's right. I was gathering information. You took notes. I was being thorough. You asked intelligent questions." Lyra pointed accusingly. "That one sounds made up." The emperor chuckled. "No. That was confirmed by witnesses." Around the table, several advisors exchanged knowing looks. One finally spoke. "The human appears effective." That simple statement immediately changed the atmosphere, because not everyone agreed. Later that evening, inside a private council chamber, several senior officials discussed Elias Ward. A holographic image of the human floated above the central table. The gathered advisors appeared uneasy. Councillor Merrick folded his arms. A former military contractor should not be educating the heir. Former being the important word, another replied. "We don't know what former means." That drew silence. Because it was true. Very little about Elias was clear. Aurelian intelligence had investigated him repeatedly. The results remained frustratingly incomplete. One advisor activated a collection of archived records. Most were heavily restricted. Others appeared partially erased. Several were classified under agreements dating back decades. Councillor Merrick frowned. How does a schoolteacher possess records this heavily protected? Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. The following week, Lyra finally managed to extract a small piece of information from him. The lesson had ended. The two sat overlooking one of the palace's vast observation terraces. Far below, the capital world glittered beneath the night sky. Starships crossed distant heavens like moving constellations. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Lyra asked quietly, "Have you always been a teacher?" Elias smiled. "No. Progress. Tiny progress. But progress. What did you do before?" He remained silent long enough that she thought he might refuse. Instead he answered, "I worked in difficult places." Difficult how? Dangerous. That caught her attention. The galaxy contained countless dangerous places. Border wars. Pirate territories. Lawless systems. Corporate conflict zones. Regions where governments barely existed. What kind of dangerous? The human looked toward the stars. His eyes seemed distant, as if seeing somewhere very far away. Places where people needed help. The answer sounded simple, yet something about it felt enormous. Heavy, as if entire stories hid behind those few words. Before she could ask more, he stood. Conversation over. Again. But for the first time she sensed genuine sadness beneath his calm exterior. A glimpse of old pain. Gone almost instantly. Yet impossible to forget. Days later another mystery appeared. It happened during an afternoon lesson in the palace archives. The room was quiet. Ancient holographic records floated around them. Lyra sat reviewing historical treaties. Elias worked nearby. Everything seemed normal. Then a small tone sounded from his personal datapad. A message. Nothing unusual. Except for what happened next. Elias looked at the screen. And froze. Not visibly. Not dramatically. Most people would have missed it. Lyra didn't. Because she had spent months studying him. The human's eyes narrowed slightly. The warmth vanished. His jaw tightened. The change lasted only seconds. But it was real. The first genuine emotional reaction she had ever witnessed from him. Slowly, Elias stood. The datapad screen reflected strange symbols. Encrypted. Military-grade encryption. Not civilian. Not educational. Something else. Something far more serious. Lyra's curiosity instantly returned. Elias. The human didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the message. For the first time since she had met him, he looked troubled. Deeply troubled. And whatever he had just read. It had come from a world far beyond the peaceful life of a palace tutor. The first warning arrived disguised as routine paperwork. Nobody paid attention. In the Imperial Intelligence Directorate, thousands of reports flowed through encrypted networks every day. Pirate sightings, trade disputes, border incidents, smuggling operations, political unrest. Most never reached the Emperor. Most never mattered. This report looked exactly the same. A small fleet of unidentified vessels had been detected near the outer sectors of Aurelian space. Nothing unusual. Merchant routes often attracted private security groups, mercenaries, and independent contractors. The report was filed, archived, forgotten. 3 days later, another report appeared. Then another. Then another. Different systems. Different locations. Different witnesses. Yet a pattern slowly emerged. The ships never stayed long. Never attacked. Never traded. Never communicated. They simply observed. And then disappeared. Captain Varen stared at the growing collection of reports displayed across the holographic table. The reptilian commander frowned. His scales darkened slightly, a sign of irritation among his species. Show them again. The intelligence officer obeyed. Dozens of star maps illuminated the chamber. Tiny red markers appeared across the Empire's outer territories. At first glance they seemed random. Upon closer inspection, they were not. Varen leaned forward. His military instincts immediately sensed something wrong. The vessels were moving with purpose. Not attacking. Not raiding. Not exploring. Studying. The distinction mattered. Increase patrols. Across the entire border? Yes. Several officers exchanged uncertain looks. That would require enormous resources. The Empire's borders stretched across hundreds of systems. You believe they're preparing an invasion? Varen hesitated. Something felt wrong. But not in the way they expected. No. The answer surprised everyone. Then what? The captain looked at the star maps again. The uncomfortable feeling remained. Like a puzzle with one missing piece. I don't know. And that answer disturbed him more than any invasion fleet could have. The palace changed almost overnight. Security checkpoints multiplied. Additional guards appeared. Surveillance drones became more common. Visitors underwent deeper screening procedures. Officially, nothing was wrong. Unofficially, everyone knew something had changed. Even Lyra noticed. One afternoon she watched a squad of Imperial sentinels conducting emergency response drills inside one of the palace courtyards. The armored warriors moved with precise efficiency. Weapons ready. Shields active.
Combat formation perfecte.
Their seriousness was impossible to miss. She found Elias observing the exercise from a nearby balcony. What happened? The human didn't answer immediately. His gaze followed the soldiers below. Something has everyone nervous. An attack. Maybe. That wasn't reassuring. Lyra crossed her arms. You know more than you're saying. A small smile appeared. Usually. She rolled her eyes. That answer was becoming annoyingly familiar. Below them, the training exercise continued. One sentinel stumbled during a maneuver. Instantly another soldier covered the gap.
No hesitación. No confusión.
Just trust. Elias watched carefully. Then nodded to himself. What? Good team. Lyra frowned. That's what you're focused on. It matters. Why? Elias rested his hands against the railing. Because under pressure, people reveal who they really are. The statement felt strangely personal, as though it came from experience rather than theory. Lyra noticed that. She noticed everything now. And increasingly, she realized many of his lessons weren't lessons at all. They were memories disguised as advice. The following week brought another development. A merchant convoy vanished near the edge of Imperial territory. No distress call.
No survivors. No requis.
Gone. The disappearance ignited concern throughout the military. Several theories emerged immediately. Pirates. Rebels. Foreign powers. Mercenaries. The last possibility drew particular attention. Mercenary groups had become increasingly active across neighboring regions. Entire companies appeared to be relocating. Ships were being hired. Weapons purchased. Contracts signed. Money moved. The galaxy's underworld was becoming unusually busy. Nobody knew why. That uncertainty spread through the Imperial court like poison. The Emperor convened a closed security briefing. senior military officers, intelligence directors, political advisors, fleet commanders. The most powerful minds in the empire gathered around a massive holographic display. Images of unidentified vessels rotated above the chamber. Data scrolled endlessly. Threat assessments, probabilities, predictions. The discussion continued for hours. Yet no consensus emerged. Some believed it was simple criminal activity. Others suspected a rival empire. Several argued the reports were unrelated. The room slowly filled with frustration. Near the back of the chamber stood an observer who technically shouldn't have been there. Elias Ward. Officially, he was present only because he had accompanied Princess Lyra earlier in the day. Nobody particularly cared what a tutor thought about military matters. Until one image appeared. The holographic display shifted. A partially recovered sensor recording filled the room. A vessel drifted across the projection. Its hull markings were damaged. Incomplete. Barely visible. Most officers ignored them. Elias did not. His eyes locked onto the insignia. For a single second his entire body became still. Completely still. Captain Varen noticed immediately. So did the Emperor. Because soldiers recognized that reaction. The reaction of someone who had just recognized an old enemy. Stop. The single word silenced the room. The intelligence officer froze the image. Everyone looked toward Elias. The human stepped closer. His face remained calm. But something had changed. The same thing Lyra had seen when he received the encrypted message. The warmth was gone. "What is it?" asked Varen. Elias stared at the insignia. A black triangular symbol partially hidden beneath battle damage. Most present had never seen it before. The human clearly had. Several times. Possibly many times. Where did this image come from? The intelligence officer answered. Outer Sector 37. Elias nodded once. As if confirming something. What does the symbol mean? The Emperor asked. Silence lingered. Then Elias finally spoke. Professional mercenaries. That answer drew immediate skepticism. The room contained military experts. Many had fought mercenaries. None appeared concerned. One admiral snorted. So criminals with uniforms. Elias looked at him. The admiral suddenly regretted speaking. Not because Elias threatened him. Because for the first time the human's eyes looked old. Very old. Filled with memories nobody else in the room shared. No. The answer came quietly. Not criminals. The chamber grew silent. Predators. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked him. Something in his voice prevented it. The Emperor leaned forward. You know them? Elias didn't answer directly. Instead he looked at the map. At the fleet movements. At the missing convoy. At the intelligence reports. At the routes. The patterns. The timelines. The observations. Piece by piece he assembled something nobody else had seen. Then his expression darkened. Not fear. Recognition. The realization of someone finally understanding the shape of a threat. And realizing everyone else was looking in the wrong direction. The Emperor noticed. So tell me. Elias remained silent for several moments. The chamber waited. Military officers. Advisors. Intelligence analysts. Even Lyra found herself holding her breath. Finally the human spoke. Softly. Calmly. With absolute certainty. They're not scouting your borders. Confusion spread immediately. Several officers exchanged looks. If not the borders, then what? Elias lifted his eyes toward the Emperor. Toward the throne. Toward Princess Lyra. And the room suddenly became very cold. They're scouting your daughter. The Emperor dismissed the warning. Not completely. Not recklessly. But enough. Additional security measures were implemented. More guards were assigned to Princess Lyra. Surveillance systems received upgrades. Travel schedules became restricted. The palace entered a heightened state of alert. Yet beneath all of it lingered a dangerous assumption. The assumption that there was still time. The assumption that the enemy was preparing. Watching. Planning. Waiting. Nobody imagined they were already in position. Nobody except Elias. And even he couldn't prove it. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then 8. Nothing happened. The palace slowly relaxed. Advisors returned to politics. Military commanders focused on border patrols. Security officers began questioning whether the threat had been exaggerated. Even Lyra started wondering. She sat across from Elias during an afternoon lesson inside the Grand Observatory. Thousands of stars glittered beyond the transparent dome overhead. The palace seemed peaceful. Normal. Safe. Perhaps you were wrong. Elias didn't look up from the datapad he was reviewing. Perhaps. You don't sound convinced. I'm not. Lyra sighed dramatically. Do humans ever stop worrying? No. That sounds exhausting. It is. For a brief moment she managed to make him smile. The expression vanished almost immediately. His attention shifted toward the stars. Toward nothing she could see. Toward something that clearly continued bothering him. The feeling returned. That strange sensation she'd experienced ever since the security briefing. The sense that Elias wasn't waiting for danger. The sense that he recognized it. The attack began at 2:17 local time. Later, investigators would spend months reconstructing the sequence of events. They would discover dozens of coordinated actions occurring simultaneously across the palace. Communications relays failed. Security sensors shut down. Emergency response systems malfunctioned. Internal defense grids disconnected from a network. At first each problem appeared isolated. Technical. Minor. Manageable. Together they became catastrophic. The sabotage had begun long before the attack itself. Weeks before. Possibly months. Someone had infiltrated the palace. Someone patient. Someone skilled. Someone who knew exactly where to strike. Lyra awoke to darkness. For several seconds she remained motionless. Confused. Disoriented. The lighting system inside her chambers had failed. That alone was unusual. The palace possessed dozens of backup systems. A complete blackout was nearly impossible. Then she heard it. A distant explosion. The floor vibrated beneath her feet. Another followed. Closer. This time alarms began screaming throughout the palace. Red emergency lights flashed to life. Lyra sat upright. Her heart immediately accelerated. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The chamber doors burst open. Captain Varen stormed inside surrounded by Imperial sentinels. The massive reptilian officer already wore combat armor. His pulse rifle remained active. Your Highness. Move.
No explanation. No ceremony. Pure urgency.
Fear. The sight alone terrified her. Because Varen wasn't afraid of anything. What happened? We are under attack. The words hit like ice water. Elsewhere throughout the palace, chaos erupted. Mercenary strike teams appeared from hidden access routes. Stealth transports emerged from beneath cloud cover. Explosive charges shattered defensive positions. Elite guards fought desperately to contain multiple breaches simultaneously. Yet every response seemed delayed. Every counterattack arrived seconds too late. As though the attackers somehow knew exactly where Imperial forces would move. Because they did. Someone had provided them that information. Elias was already running. The moment the alarms activated, he knew. Not guessed. Knew. His worst prediction had become reality. The palace corridors blurred around him. Panicked civilians rushed in every direction. Security teams mobilized. Emergency bulkheads descended. The entire structure trembled beneath distant detonations. A sentinel squad nearly collided with him. Sir, this sector is restricted. The officer stopped speaking. Not because Elias threatened him. Not because he identified him. Something else. The human's expression. The urgency. The terrifying certainty. The soldiers instinctively stepped aside. Elias never slowed. Inside the royal residential wing, the battle intensified. Mercenaries in black combat armor flooded through breached corridors. Pulse fire illuminated the darkness. Explosions echoed through crystal hallways. Imperial guards fought with desperate courage. Every meter became a battlefield. Every doorway became a fortress. Bodies began accumulating. Both sides paid heavily. Yet the attackers continued advancing. Not toward the throne room. Not toward military command. Not toward communications. Toward one destination. One target. Princess Lyra. The realization struck Captain Varen during the evacuation. The attackers ignored opportunities, ignored strategic objectives, ignored valuable assets. Everything pointed toward a single objective, a single person. Move faster, he roared. The escort team accelerated. Lyra struggled to keep pace. Weapons fire echoed closer. Too close. A section of wall exploded. The shockwave hurled soldiers across the corridor. Dust filled the air. Screams followed. Mercenaries emerged from the smoke. Their ambush had been perfectly timed, perfectly positioned. They had known the evacuation route. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone imagined. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. 30 horrifying seconds. Imperial sentinels died protecting their princess. Veterans who had survived wars fell one by one. Captain Varen personally killed 4 attackers. Then 6. Then 8. But more kept coming.
Professionals.
Disciplined. Relentless. They weren't trying to win a battle. They were trying to complete a mission. And they were willing to die doing it. Elias arrived moments too late. The hallway was silent. The battle was over. Smoke drifted through shattered corridors. Emergency lights flickered weakly. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. Imperial guards. Mercenaries. Broken weapons. Pools of blood. The aftermath of desperate resistance. For several seconds he simply stood there. Motionless. Listening. Searching. Hoping. Captain Varen remained alive. Barely. The reptilian commander struggled against severe wounds. Elias. The human crossed the corridor immediately. Where is she? The question came calmly. Too calmly. Varen looked away. The answer was obvious. The silence said everything. They had failed. Lyra was gone. More soldiers arrived. Medical teams. Security officers. Royal advisors. The Emperor himself. The scene descended into controlled chaos. Questions flew in every direction. Who attacked? How many? Where did they go? Who helped them? How had this happened? Nobody possessed answers. Only grief. Only failure. Only shock. Then something changed. The atmosphere shifted. Subtly. Dangerously. People stopped talking. One by one, eyes turned toward Elias Ward. Toward the quiet human standing among the dead. Because for the first time since anyone had known him, he wasn't calm. The change wasn't loud. There was no shouting.
No threats.
No dramatic display. That made it worse. Far worse. The warmth that usually softened his features had vanished completely. The patience was gone. The kindness was gone. Even the sadness was gone. What remained felt ancient. Cold. Focused. Terrifying. Several sentinels unconsciously stepped backward. The Emperor noticed. So did everyone else. It was the same reaction Lyra had observed months ago. The instinctive need to create distance. Only now nobody ignored it. Because now they understood something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Elias slowly looked across the battlefield. At the fallen guards. At the shattered walls. At the blood. At the cost. His gaze lingered on one young sentinel who had died protecting the evacuation route. Then another. Then another. Each face seemed to harden something inside him. The silence stretched. No one dared interrupt it. Finally, the human spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. Yet every person present heard it. Every word. Every syllable. And the moment he said it, a chill spread through the ruined corridor. Because it sounded less like grief. And more like a death sentence. They shouldn't have taken her. The Empire responded to the kidnapping exactly as empires always did. Meetings. Committees. Strategies. Negotiations. Within hours of Princess Lyra's abduction, the Imperial Palace had transformed into a command center of panic disguised as professionalism. Fleet admirals debated response options. Intelligence directors analyzed incomplete data. Diplomats prepared emergency channels. Economic advisors calculated potential consequences. Every corridor buzzed with urgency. Every room contained arguments. Every official possessed a different solution. Yet beneath all the activity lurked a brutal truth. Nobody knew where the princess had been taken. The throne chamber had never felt so cold. Emperor Valen sat upon the sun throne, but there was no majesty in the room. Only exhaustion. The ruler of the largest empire in known space looked like a father who had not slept. Because he hadn't. A holographic display hovered before him. Dozens of officials filled the chamber. The discussion had already lasted 3 hours. We must assume ransom demands are forthcoming. The diplomat's statement received several nods. Another advisor spoke immediately. Mercenary groups rarely kidnap royal targets without financial motives. A third added his opinion. Opening communication channels immediately could improve the princess's survival probability. Negotiation. Compromise. Patience. The language of governments. The language of stability. The language of people who believed there would be time. At the rear of the chamber stood Elias Ward. Silent. Motionless. Listening. When the discussion finally paused, he spoke. No. The single word cut through the room. Every eye turned toward him. The diplomat frowned. No. Elias stepped forward. We don't negotiate. The statement triggered immediate disagreement. We are discussing the life of the imperial heir. And negotiating guarantees nothing. The diplomat scoffed. Your alternative? Elias met his gaze. Find them. Silence followed. Several military officers exchanged uncertain looks. The answer sounded absurdly simple. Find them. As though locating a kidnapped princess hidden somewhere among thousands of star systems was merely an inconvenience. The diplomat shook his head. We don't even know where they are. Elias's expression never changed. Then start looking. The argument continued for another hour. The outcome never changed. The empire would pursue diplomacy, investigation, intelligence gathering, negotiation if necessary, measured responses, careful responses, responsible responses. Elias listened to every word, then quietly left. 2 hours later he appeared inside Fleet Command. The officers on duty immediately recognized him. Everyone in the palace knew who he was. Princess Lyra's tutor. The human. The strange one. The man who had somehow earned the respect of soldiers. A young lieutenant approached. Can I help you, sir? Yes. Elias placed a data authorization request on the desk. The officer glanced at it. Then blinked. Then read it again. You want a warship? Correct. The lieutenant stared. Surely this was a joke. It wasn't. The realization slowly dawned. You mean an actual warship? Yes. The officer looked around for hidden cameras. There were none. Elias, with respect, you're a civilian. Technically. The lieutenant decided not to ask what that meant. Instead, he forwarded the request. The denial arrived 19 minutes later. Not surprising. Not even slightly. Fleet Command refused immediately. The request violated approximately 47 military regulations. Possibly more. No civilian tutor was receiving command of an imperial warship. The decision seemed obvious. Rational. Final. Elias thanked them for their time. Then left. Captain Varen found him several hours later standing inside one of the palace observation decks. The reptilian commander still carried fresh bandages from the kidnapping. His wounds hadn't fully healed. His guilt had not healed at all. I heard you requested a ship. Elias nodded. They said no. They did. The captain studied him carefully. The human's calm had returned. At least on the surface. Something colder existed underneath now. Something hidden. Something dangerous. You expected that? Yes. Then why ask? A faint smile appeared. It wasn't a pleasant smile. No reason. Varen immediately knew that was a lie. The theft occurred 8 hours later. Officially, nobody understood how. Unofficially, the explanations became increasingly embarrassing. Security footage showed Elias entering Fleet Command. Again. That alone wasn't unusual. The next part was. He walked through multiple security checkpoints. None stopped him. He entered restricted sectors. Nobody challenged him. He accessed military systems.
No alarms triggered.
He reached Hangar 7. The guards greeted him. Actually greeted him. One even opened a door. The recording spread rapidly through command circles. Officers watched in disbelief. What happened here? The guard responsible appeared equally confused. I thought he was authorized. Why? The guard hesitated, then gave the strangest answer imaginable. He acted like he was. Nobody found that reassuring. By the time Fleet Command realized what was happening, Elias was already aboard the corvette Resolute Dawn, a fast military vessel designed for deep space pursuit operations. Not the largest ship, not the strongest, the fastest available, which told several admirals everything they needed to know. The human wasn't planning a battle. He was planning a hunt. Emergency communications flooded the ship. Orders, warnings, threats, demands. Elias ignored all of them. A security team rushed toward the docking bay. They arrived too late. The corvette's engines ignited. Blue light flooded the hangar. Shockwaves rattled nearby structures. Stop that ship. The command echoed through every channel. Nobody succeeded. Because by the time authorization arrived, the ship was already moving. The Resolute Dawn launched into the night sky. Imperial fighters attempted interception. The effort lasted less than 3 minutes. Not because Elias fought them. Because he outmaneuvered them. The corvette threaded through orbital traffic with impossible precision. Predicted pursuit vectors. Exploited sensor blind spots. Used civilian shipping patterns as temporary cover. Every maneuver occurred seconds before interception. The pilots chasing him became increasingly frustrated. Then increasingly alarmed. Whoever was flying that vessel possessed military experience. Extensive military experience. Far beyond anything expected from a palace tutor. The realization spread quickly. Questions followed. Lots of questions. Back at the palace, Emperor Valen finally asked one himself. The throne chamber had largely emptied. Only a handful of senior officials remained. Captain Varen stood nearby. The Emperor stared at the latest report. Then at Elias's personnel file. Then back at the report. Finally he looked up. Who is he? Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Not really. The Emperor activated higher security access. The personnel file expanded. Additional records appeared. Then vanished. Encrypted barriers blocked further progress. Classified. Restricted. Protected. The Emperor's expression darkened. There were very few records in the Empire he could not access. This was one of them. That fact alone was deeply troubling. Override. The system processed the command. Additional authorization codes appeared. Ancient ones. Human ones. Military ones. The Emperor entered emergency executive credentials. For several seconds nothing happened. Then another layer opened. More records surfaced. Most heavily censored. Some entirely blacked out. A warning suddenly appeared across the screen. Several advisors leaned forward. Captain Varen narrowed his eyes. The Emperor felt an unfamiliar sensation crawl down his spine. Unease. Because whatever they were looking at, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep it hidden. The file slowly unlocked, and at the top of the screen appeared a single line. Authorization restricted. Black Reaper program. The throne chamber was silent. Not the ordinary silence of diplomacy. Not the respectful silence of ceremony. This was the silence that followed the opening of a grave. Every person present stared at the glowing words suspended above the central holotable. Authorization restricted. Black Reaper program. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even Emperor Valen felt an unfamiliar hesitation. The title alone sounded wrong. Dangerous. The sort of designation governments created when they wanted something erased from public memory. Captain Varen slowly folded his arms. What is the Black Reaper program? The system answered before anyone else could. Warning. File contains restricted human military history. A second notification appeared. Multiple government suppression agreements detected. A third followed. Access recommended for flag level command only. The room became even quieter. Several advisors exchanged uneasy looks. If multiple governments across different regions had agreed to bury something, it usually meant one of two things: a catastrophe or a weapon. The Emperor pressed the authorization icon. The file opened. A photograph appeared. Not the Elias Ward they knew. Not the patient tutor. Not the calm educator. Not the man who spent mornings teaching leadership beneath palace gardens. This Elias was younger. Harder. Standing beside a ruined military vehicle on an alien battlefield. The image quality was poor. ancient, scarred by time. Yet one detail immediately commanded attention. The eyes. They were identical. The same eyes. Only now they lacked warmth entirely. A subtitle appeared beneath the image. Commander Elias Ward Black Reaper Unit Human Expeditionary Command. The advisors looked confused. The military officers did not, because every military organization in the galaxy used similar terminology. Commander, Unit, Expeditionary Command. This wasn't a contractor. This wasn't private security. This was war. The file expanded. Battle records flooded the display. Campaign reports. Mission summaries. Strategic evaluations. Some remained heavily censored. Others had been partially restored. The dates stretched across decades. Captain Varen leaned forward. His scales slowly lost color. What in the stars? A military analyst beside him whispered, "Those casualty numbers can't be correct." The Emperor looked closer, then understood the reaction. One mission report listed an enemy force of 30,000. The operation outcome showed victory. Human casualties, 17. Enemy casualties, classified. Another campaign involved an entire pirate coalition controlling 6 systems. The coalition ceased to exist 73 days later. No explanation followed. Only a brief notation. Threat neutralized. The simplicity felt horrifying. More records surfaced. The room watched in stunned silence. A criminal empire collapsed after a series of precision strikes. A separatist fleet disappeared during a 6-month conflict. A planetary siege ended without a conventional invasion. Again and again the same name appeared. Ward. 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 Sometimes as commander. Sometimes as advisor. Sometimes as field operative. Always at the center. Always where impossible situations became victories. The Emperor frowned. How many wars was he involved in? The archive AI responded instantly. Confirmed participation. 23 major conflicts. Several advisors nearly choked. 23. Most military officers never experienced more than one. Perhaps 2. 23 belonged to legends. Or nightmares. The next file changed everything. It wasn't a combat report. It was an intelligence assessment, generated by an alien coalition government nearly 40 years earlier. The report title appeared. Subject: Human Special Operations Commander Elias Ward. The analysis was chilling. Not because it described superhuman abilities. It didn't. In fact, it repeatedly emphasized that Ward possessed no extraordinary biological advantages. No genetic enhancement.
No cybernetic superiority. No unusual physiology.
Instead, the report focused on something else. Adaptability. The word appeared dozens of times. The assessment described how Ward repeatedly defeated larger forces through creativity. How he weaponized enemy assumptions. How he transformed disadvantages into opportunities. How he treated battlefields like puzzles. One passage stood out. Subject consistently rejects predictable solutions. Strategic modeling failure rate exceeds 87. Captain Varen exhaled slowly. That's impossible. The military analyst beside him shook his head. No. His voice sounded unsettled. It's worse. Everyone looked toward him. The analyst swallowed. If prediction models fail 87% of the time. He pointed toward the report. Then nobody ever knows what he's going to do. The realization settled heavily across the chamber. Because unpredictability was one of the most dangerous weapons in existence. Then came the pirate wars. The room learned why criminal syndicates still feared his name. Images appeared across the holodisplay. Raider fleets. Pirate fortresses. Smuggling kingdoms. Entire regions of lawless space. For years, these organizations had terrorized trade routes, destroyed colonies, enslaved civilians. Governments failed repeatedly to stop them. Then Elias Ward arrived. The campaign records lasted only 6 months. Afterward, 3 pirate kingdoms vanished. Not defeated. Vanished. No surviving leadership.
No surviving infrastructure.
No recovery.
No resurgence.
Nothing. An advisor stared at the reports. How? The archive AI answered. Details remain classified. For some reason that response felt worse. Another file emerged. This one carried a personal designation. The Emperor activated it. A family photograph appeared. The room froze, because none of them had ever imagined Elias possessing a family. In the image he stood beside a woman. Human. Smiling. A child sat on his shoulders. Both laughing. The picture radiated happiness. Ordinary happiness. The kind that existed far away from battlefields. Far away from war. Far away from death. The kind of life teachers were supposed to have. The kind of life Elias should have had. The file continued. Then stopped. A casualty notification appeared. The chamber fell silent. No one needed further explanation. No dramatic details followed. No lengthy report. Just names. Dates. Locations. Lost during a terrorist attack linked to a regional conflict. For several moments nobody spoke. Because suddenly the mystery made sense. The retirement. The disappearance. The teaching. The quiet life. The endless patience. The sadness hidden behind his eyes. The Emperor slowly sat back. For the first time he truly understood. Elias hadn't retired because he grew tired of war. He retired because war had finally taken everything from him. Another document appeared. This one was newer. Far newer. Only a few years old. A psychological evaluation. The final assessment before his release from military service. The report described a man exhausted by violence. A man seeking purpose beyond conflict. A man attempting to rebuild himself. One recommendation had been highlighted repeatedly. Encourage civilian integration. Another followed. Educational environments strongly recommended. Captain Varen looked away. Suddenly he remembered the palace gardens. The lessons. The patience. The way Elias taught Lyra responsibility instead of power. The way he encouraged service instead of authority. The way he always seemed happiest when helping others learn. The human had not been hiding from his past. He had been escaping it. The final records loaded. Military evaluations. Threat assessments. Strategic recommendations. One by one they painted the same picture. Not a soldier. Not merely a commander. A force governments preferred never to unleash. A weapon created by experience, sacrifice, and loss. The Emperor stared at the reports for a long time. Then his gaze drifted toward the stars beyond the palace windows. Toward the stolen corvette already racing across space. Toward the kidnappers. Toward the mercenaries. And slowly a terrible realization formed. Those mercenaries believed they had kidnapped a princess. They thought they had taken a political hostage. A bargaining chip. A source of leverage. They had no idea what they had actually done. No idea who they had provoked. No idea what was now coming for them. The final page of the archive appeared. A warning authored decades earlier by a human admiral. Simple. Direct. Unambiguous. The words seemed to echo through the silent chamber. If Ward enters the battlefield, casualties become statistics. The mercenary outpost orbited a dead moon. A fitting location. The moon itself was little more than a shattered ball of grey rock drifting through the darkness of the Karen expanse.
No atmosphere.
No cities. No value. Which made it perfect. Criminals loved forgotten places. The station hidden above its surface officially didn't exist. Unofficially, everyone in the underworld knew exactly what happened there. Weapons changed hands. Contracts were negotiated. Hostages were transferred. Information was bought and sold. And somewhere inside its encrypted databases existed the first link in the chain that had stolen Princess Lyra. At least that was what Elias believed. The belief wasn't based on hope. It was based on experience. The kidnappers had used professional mercenary channels. Professional mercenaries followed predictable patterns. Not because they were stupid. Because systems worked. And systems left trails. The Corvette Resolute Dawn drifted silently beyond sensor range. Its engines remained dark. Its emissions nearly non-existent. Inside the cockpit, Elias sat alone. A holographic map floated before him. Data scrolled continuously. Shipping records. Communications traffic. Fuel purchases. Docking schedules. Financial transfers. Thousands of seemingly unrelated details. Most people saw chaos. Elias saw behavior. Patterns. Habits. Mistakes. Humans had taught themselves long ago that every system contained weaknesses. The larger the system became, the more weaknesses appeared. Criminal organizations were no different. The station manager purchased luxury imports every 43 days. A particular security officer gambled excessively. 3 maintenance contractors routinely bypassed inspection procedures. A fuel supplier skimmed profits through false invoices. Individually meaningless. Together. An opening. The humans studied the data one final time. Then shut down the display. The hunt was over. The killing was about to begin. Inside the station, nobody was worried. Why would they be? The kidnapping had succeeded. The princess was gone. The Empire hadn't retaliated. No fleet appeared. No military task force emerged. No rescue operation had been detected. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. At least that's what they believed. The security chief laughed while watching the latest news reports. The Imperials are negotiating. A dozen mercenaries gathered inside the operations room. Several laughed. One raised a drink. They always negotiate. Another nodded. Politicians prefer talking. A third smirked. Good. Means we are getting paid. The room erupted in amusement. Nobody noticed the station's long-range communications array go offline. The first body was discovered 23 minutes later. A technician found the guards slumped inside an access corridor. Dead.
No gunshot wounds.
No signs of struggle.
No alarm.
Nothing. The discovery caused mild concern. Then confusion. Then irritation. Station security assumed it was an internal dispute. A drunken argument. A criminal disagreement. The investigation began. 10 minutes later, another guard vanished. Then another. Then another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Security teams mobilized. Search groups formed. Sensors activated. Still nothing.
No intruders. No breached airlocks. No explanation.
The station commander watched reports flood his terminal. His frustration grew rapidly. Find them. We are trying. Try harder. The security chief hesitated. Sir. What? The missing personnel. The commander frowned. What about them? The officer swallowed. None of them were random. The room grew quiet. The commander reviewed the list. His expression slowly changed. Every missing individual shared something in common. All had participated in the kidnapping operation. Not every station employee. Not random personnel. Only those connected to Princess Lyra. A cold feeling settled into the room. For the first time, genuine fear appeared. Someone wasn't attacking the station. Someone was hunting specific people. Elias moved through the station like a ghost. Not because he was invisible. Because he understood people. That was the secret. Not superior weapons. Not superior strength. Understanding. Mercenaries under pressure followed predictable behaviors. Fear narrowed options. Stress simplified decisions. Training became instinct. Instinct became vulnerability. Every ambush occurred exactly where Elias expected. Every security sweep followed expected routes. Every response created new opportunities. Years ago, military analysts had described him as unpredictable. The truth was simpler. He didn't need to predict himself. He predicted everyone else. The station surveillance network eventually captured footage. The recording spread through criminal channels within hours. Thousands watched. Thousands wished they hadn't. The footage lasted only 11 seconds. A security squad entered a corridor. 6 mercenaries. Experienced. Well-armed.
Combat vétéran.
The hallway appeared empty. Then the lights failed. For less than 2 seconds. When illumination returned, 5 mercenaries were already down. The 6th fired wildly. The camera briefly captured a human silhouette moving through the smoke. Then the recording ended. The final frame became infamous. Not because it showed violence. Because it showed calm. The human wasn't rushing. Wasn't panicking. Wasn't struggling. He looked like a man completing routine work. Fear spread faster than information. Rumors flooded criminal networks. The Black Reaper. The human ghost. Ward. Old names resurfaced. Names younger mercenaries had never heard before. Veterans remembered. And those veterans suddenly wanted to be somewhere else. 3 hours after the assault began, station resistance collapsed. Not because everyone was dead. Because everyone was hiding. The corridors had become silent. Terrified. Every shadow felt dangerous. Every sound triggered panic. The station commander finally attempted escape. He never reached his ship. Elias found him inside a secured transport bay. The criminal leader sat against a cargo container. Bleeding. Exhausted. Defeated. Several unconscious guards surrounded him. The commander stared upward as Elias approached. For a moment neither spoke. The mercenary finally laughed. A broken laugh. The kind produced by hopelessness. You really are him. Elias remained silent. The commander shook his head. We thought the stories were exaggerated. Still silence. The mercenary swallowed. Fear visibly tightened his features. Because now he understood. The stories hadn't been exaggerated. They hadn't been large enough. Where is she? The question arrived calmly. The commander looked away. Wrong answer. Elias noticed immediately. Not because of intuition. Because of experience. The man wasn't protecting a location. He was protecting information. Different fear. Different behavior. Different meaning. The realization settled heavily. And for the first time since arriving, Elias felt something close to dread. You don't have her. The commander laughed weakly. No. The answer echoed through the transport bay. No, we don't. Elias took a step forward. The mercenary flinched. We were never keeping her. The human's expression hardened. Every second mattered. Every delay mattered. And suddenly the timeline became much worse. The commander closed his eyes. Perhaps out of guilt. Perhaps out of fear. Perhaps because he knew what would happen next. When he finally spoke, his voice barely rose above a whisper. We delivered her. The words hit harder than any weapon. To who? The mercenary looked at him. Terror filled his eyes. Not terror of Elias. Terror of the people beyond him. The people higher in the chain. The people even mercenaries feared. And that answer told Elias something far more dangerous than a name. This operation had never been about money. Never about ransom. Never about ordinary criminals. Something larger existed. Something hidden. Something powerful. The commander swallowed. Then finally revealed the truth. Lyra has already been sold to a larger organization. Princess Lyra had always imagined captivity would feel dramatic. Chains. Interrogations. Threats. Perhaps even speeches from villains explaining their plans. Reality proved disappointingly different. Reality was boredom. Cold metal walls. Artificial lighting. Endless hours. And uncertainty. Especially uncertainty. The prison compartment aboard the vessel Iron Revenant measured barely 4 meters across.
No windows existed.
No indication of time. No clue where they were traveling. Only the constant vibration of engines somewhere deep within the ship. Days had passed. At least she thought days had passed. Without natural light it became difficult to tell. The uncertainty gnawed at her. The silence gnawed even harder. The kidnappers treated her strangely. That bothered her more than outright cruelty would have. Nobody tortured her. Nobody threatened her. Nobody demanded political concessions. Nobody requested ransom. The guards followed strict instructions. Keep her alive. Keep her healthy. Keep her secure. Nothing more. It felt less like imprisonment. More like transportation. As though she were cargo.
Valle del cargo.
But cargo nonetheless. The realization sent chills through her every time she thought about it. Because cargo always had a destination. And she still had no idea what hers was. One evening, assuming it was evening, voices drifted through the corridor outside her cell. At first she ignored them. Mercenaries talked constantly. Most conversations were worthless. Complaints. Arguments. Rumors. The usual language of bored criminals. Then she heard a familiar name. Ward. Lyra froze. The voices continued. You hear what happened at Karen? A pause. Then another voice answered. Everybody heard. The first speaker sounded nervous. Genuinely nervous. 32 dead. 41. No way. I'm telling you, 41. Silence followed. Then someone muttered a curse. Lyra slowly moved toward the cell door. Listening. The guards clearly believed she couldn't hear them. That assumption proved useful. One mercenary laughed weakly. A forced laugh. The kind people used when trying to convince themselves everything was fine. One guy. Nobody responded. Seriously. One guy. Still silence. The guard's confidence visibly faded. Finally, another voice spoke. You keep saying that like it makes things better. The corridor grew quiet. Nobody disagreed. Lyra felt her pulse quicken. Were they talking about Elias? They had to be. No one else used that name. No one else fit the description. The realization felt impossible. Elias was a teacher. A patient one. An annoying one. A stubborn one. But still a teacher. Not whatever these people seemed to believe. The conversations continued over the following days. And each one revealed another piece of a puzzle Lyra hadn't known existed. Some stories sounded ridiculous. Others sounded terrifying. All sounded impossible. One veteran mercenary claimed Ward had dismantled an entire pirate station by himself. Another insisted he'd witnessed the aftermath of a Black Reaper operation decades earlier. A third swore Ward once infiltrated a military fortress believed to be impregnable. Nobody agreed on details. Everyone agreed on one thing. Fear. The fear sounded genuine. Not exaggerated. Not performative. Real. These were hardened criminals. Killers. Veterans. People who routinely faced violence. Yet whenever Elias Ward became the topic, voices dropped. Conversations quieted. Eyes shifted nervously, as though merely speaking his name invited disaster. One particularly old mercenary became the source of most stories. His species resembled a heavily scarred reptilian predator. Half his face appeared cybernetic. The other half looked perpetually irritated. The younger guards called him Kresh. And unlike the others, Kresh seemed old enough to remember. One shift cycle, several mercenaries gathered near Lyra's cell. The old veteran sat among them, cleaning a pulse rifle. A younger guard scoffed. You're all acting like he's some kind of monster. Kresh looked up. No. The answer came immediately. No. No. The veteran returned to cleaning his weapon. The younger guard smirked. Then what's the problem? For several seconds Kresh remained silent. Finally he sighed. The problem is that monsters act like monsters. The younger mercenary frowned. What does that mean? Kresh looked directly at him. It means you see them coming. The corridor became quiet. The old veteran tapped a claw against the rifle. Ward looks human. The words lingered. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Several guards exchanged glances. Nobody seemed eager to continue the discussion. That conversation haunted Lyra long after the guards departed. Ward looks human. Such a strange statement. Such a disturbing one. Because she remembered the man who taught her how leadership required sacrifice. The man who spent hours explaining responsibility. The man who planted trees knowing he would never enjoy their shade. The man who patiently endured her endless attempts to frustrate him. That Elias felt real. Yet apparently another version existed. One the galaxy feared. One criminal syndicates remembered. One mercenaries whispered about. The contradiction made no sense. How could both versions be true? The answer arrived accidentally. Two guards began arguing outside her cell. A common occurrence. This argument, however, became unusually loud. One accused the other of panicking. The second snapped immediately. Because I'm not stupid. You think Ward's actually coming here? The guard hesitated, then nodded. The first mercenary laughed. Across half the galaxy? The second looked genuinely offended. Do you know how many bounties existed on that man? The laughter stopped. Lyra leaned closer to the door. Her heart pounded. What? The second guard lowered his voice. But not enough. Entire syndicates offered rewards. The first guard frowned. How much? The answer arrived immediately. Enough to buy moons. Silence followed. Complete silence. Because everyone understood what that meant. Criminal organizations didn't spend fortunes hunting ordinary people. Only threats. Only legends. Only nightmares. That night Lyra couldn't sleep. Not because of fear. Because of realization. For months she had investigated Elias, questioned him, observed him, attempted to understand him. Yet she now understood less than ever. The human she thought she knew had apparently fought wars, destroyed criminal empires, earned bounties large enough to terrify syndicates, and somehow ended up teaching literature inside a palace. The disconnect felt impossible. Yet the fear she heard from hardened mercenaries was impossible to fake. That frightened her. Not because she feared Elias, because she realized she never truly knew him. Several hours later, alarms briefly activated somewhere deeper inside the ship. Only for a moment. Then they stopped. The interruption triggered immediate tension among the guards. Weapons appeared. Communications channels activated. Security teams moved through corridors. Nothing happened. Eventually, the alert was dismissed. A sensor malfunction. At least officially. Yet the atmosphere never recovered. The guards remained uneasy. Watching. Waiting. Listening. As if expecting something. Or someone. Near the end of the shift, 2 mercenaries stood outside a cell. One looked toward the security cameras. Then toward the corridor. Then leaned closer to his companion. His voice dropped to a whisper. But Lyra still heard every word. And the fear inside those words chilled her far more than captivity ever had. If Ward finds this ship, we are already dead. The galaxy began whispering his name again. Not governments. Not military commanders. Not politicians. Criminals. Pirates. Smugglers. Mercenaries. The people who survived by hearing danger before it arrived. The people who understood that fear could be the difference between life and death. Across hidden communication channels and encrypted underworld networks, a simple message spread from system to system. Ward is hunting. And wherever that message appeared, activity stopped. Ships changed routes. Safe houses emptied. Black market meetings were cancelled. Veteran criminals suddenly found reasons to leave entire sectors. The younger generation laughed. The older generation did not. Because the older generation remembered. The Resolute Dawn emerged from hyperspace above a drifting mining station hidden inside an asteroid field. Officially, the station processed rare minerals. Unofficially, it sold information. Everything had a price there. Trade secrets. Fleet movements. Political scandals. Assassination contracts. Kidnapping routes. If information existed, somebody inside the station knew about it. Normally, obtaining that information required money. A great deal of money. Elias arrived with something more valuable. Fear. The station administrator was already sweating before the human entered his office. The alien species lacked sweat glands. That somehow made the achievement even more impressive. The administrator stared at the security recordings. 37 guards. Neutralized. Not killed. Neutralized. Every weapon removed. Every security system disabled. Every escape route blocked. The human had reached the office without firing a single shot. That frightened the administrator more than violence would have. Violence was emotional. This felt professional. The door opened. Elias entered. The administrator immediately raised both hands. I don't know where she is. The human sat down across from him. Calmly. Patiently. Exactly the way he used to sit across from Lyra during lessons. The comparison sent a strange pain through him. He ignored it. You know who arranged the transfer. The administrator froze. Not because Elias guessed correctly. Because he hadn't guessed. The certainty in his voice revealed knowledge. Not suspicion. Knowledge. The administrator understood immediately. Someone else had already talked. Someone higher in the chain. Someone important. The walls were closing. 3 hours later, Elias left with names. 2 days later, those names became locations. A week later, those locations became answers. The hunt accelerated. Each victory revealed another layer. Another lie. Another hidden hand manipulating events from the shadows. The kidnappers had never intended to keep Lyra. The mercenaries had merely transported her. The transport crews had merely transferred her. The middlemen had merely arranged logistics. Every captured operative pointed toward somebody else. Somebody higher. Somebody richer. Somebody more powerful. The conspiracy stretched farther than expected. Farther than even Elias initially believed. The next target was a pirate station hidden within a nebula. The station commander confidently prepared defenses. 200 fighters. Defensive turrets. Shield arrays. Veteran soldiers. He expected a battle. What he got was Elias. The human never attacked the station directly. Instead, he studied it. Watched it. Learned it. The commander expected aggression. Elias delivered manipulation. A forged communication here. A hack sensor reading there. A carefully timed transmission. A few subtle changes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Then he waited. The pirates destroyed themselves. Paranoia spread through their ranks. Accusations followed. Alliances collapsed. Internal fighting erupted. By the time Elias entered the station, most resistance had already neutralized itself. The commander finally understood the terrifying truth. Ward didn't win because he fought harder. Ward won because he made enemies fight the wrong battles. As weeks passed, evidence accumulated. Not random evidence. Connected evidence. Disturbing evidence. A pattern emerged. Money flowed through shell corporations. Weapons moved through third-party suppliers. Mercenary contracts originated from hidden accounts. Political extremists received funding from unknown benefactors. Every trail eventually disappeared behind sophisticated layers of deception. Yet one detail kept appearing. Again. And again. And again. A symbol. A crest. A government seal buried beneath countless layers of concealment. At first Elias dismissed it. Then he found it again. And again. Eventually coincidence became impossible. Someone wasn't merely hiding involvement. Someone was concealing national involvement. That realization changed everything. Meanwhile, aboard the Iron Revenant, Lyra sensed tension growing among her captors. The atmosphere had changed. The guards no longer joked. No longer argued. No longer laughed. Every update from outside seemed worse than the last. One guard disappeared after receiving a transmission. Another openly requested reassignment. A third attempted desertion. The crew's confidence was evaporating. Fear was replacing it. And fear always meant something had gone wrong. Elias finally confirmed the truth on a hidden intelligence depot orbiting a gas giant near disputed territory. The facility had been abandoned before his arrival. Almost. One operative remained. An analyst. Not a soldier. Not a mercenary. Just a frightened bureaucrat left behind to erase records. The analyst surrendered immediately. Smart choice. Elias reviewed the surviving files. Hours passed. The deeper he looked, the darker the picture became. Mercenary fleets. Political destabilization campaigns. Economic sabotage. Covert operations. Propaganda networks. Every piece connected. Every piece pointed toward the same objective. The weakening of the Aurelian Empire. Not destruction. Destabilization. Chaos. Civil unrest. Political fracture. The kidnapping wasn't the goal. The kidnapping was the trigger. Lyra had never been the prize. She was the spark. The analyst sat trembling across from him. You don't understand. Elias continued reviewing files. Then explain. The alien swallowed. His fear seemed directed somewhere else. Not at Elias. At whoever employed him. The operation goes beyond the princess. I know. The analyst's eyes widened. Then you know who's behind it? Elias already suspected. He needed confirmation. Nothing more. The analyst looked down. Then finally whispered the name. A rival empire. An ancient competitor of the Aurelians. Powerful. Patient. Ruthless. The realization settled heavily. This had never been criminal. It had always been geopolitical. A war disguised as a kidnapping. The final data vault required 3 separate encryption keys. 2 hours of decryption. And 1 risky bypass. Most operatives would have failed. Most operatives weren't Elias Ward. When the files finally opened, a star map appeared. 1 destination highlighted. 1 destination protected. 1 destination hidden behind countless layers of security. The analyst saw it and immediately went pale. No. Elias studied the map. Coordinates. Defense layouts. Supply routes. Military infrastructure. His expression never changed. But inside, something hardened. Because he finally knew where Lyra was, and why nobody expected a rescue. The world displayed before him wasn't a prison. It wasn't a station. It wasn't a base. It was a fortress. A planet transformed into a weapon. Orbital defense networks. Planetary shields. Military garrisons. Enough firepower to stop entire fleets. Enough protection to discourage invasion. Enough defenses to make governments surrender before trying. The analysts stared at the map in horror. Nobody attacked that world. Nobody. That was the point. Slowly, Elias rose from his chair. His eyes never left the display. The hunt was over. The rescue was about to begin. Because at the center of the star map glowed the final destination. A fortress world designed to withstand entire fleets. The planet was called Vanishes. Even its name sounded hostile. From orbit, the world resembled a steel wound carved into the darkness of space. Massive orbital platforms circled the globe. Defense satellites floated in layered formations. Weapons arrays tracked every vessel entering the system. Beneath them, enormous shield generators protected the planet's surface. Cities had been transformed into military installations. Mountain ranges concealed missile silos. Entire oceans contained submerged naval complexes. The world had spent decades preparing for war. And according to every military doctrine in existence, it had succeeded. The Resolute Dawn remained hidden beyond sensor range. Inside the cockpit, Elias studied the fortress world in silence. The display projected countless red markers. Defense batteries. Patrol routes. Sensor networks. Military garrisons. Thousands upon thousands of defenders. Any sane commander would have reached the same conclusion.
Impossible.
Even a full Imperial fleet would struggle. One stolen corvette had no chance. A transmission signal flashed. Imperial command. Elias accepted it. Emperor Valen appeared. The ruler looked older than he had weeks earlier. Exhaustion lingered beneath his eyes. Behind him stood admirals, intelligence officers, and Captain Varen. The Emperor spoke first. "We've confirmed the location." Elias nodded. "I know." Several military officers exchanged uneasy looks. The Emperor continued. "Our fleets are mobilizing. Too slow. We need time. So does Lyra." Silence followed. Nobody disagreed. That was the problem. The Emperor leaned forward. "Elias." The human met his gaze. "You cannot attack that world alone." Several admirals immediately nodded. One finally spoke. That fortress was designed to survive planetary invasions. Another added, "Thousands of soldiers." A third officer shook his head. Even if you reached the surface, extraction would be impossible. The military logic was flawless. Completely flawless. Unfortunately, Elias had spent much of his life exploiting flawless military logic. Because predictable thinking created predictable defenses. Predictable defenses created weaknesses. "I am not attacking the world." The statement confused everyone. The admiral frowned. "Then what exactly are you doing?" Elias looked toward the planet. His answer came calmly. "I'm entering it." 3 hours later, the Resolute Dawn disappeared. Not destroyed. Not detected. Simply gone. Imperial observers lost track of the vessel entirely. Even Emperor Valen received no further communication. The silence felt ominous. Because everyone knew what it meant. The hunt had entered its final stage. Vanishes remained unaware. For now. The Planetary Defense Network monitored thousands of potential threats every second. Warships.
Missiles.
Stridskraft. Invasion fleets. No one was searching for a single man. That mistake would become very expensive. The first failure occurred inside a communications relay buried beneath a northern mountain range. Technicians initially blamed equipment malfunction. A power fluctuation. Nothing serious. Repairs began immediately. Then the backup system failed. Then the emergency backup. Then the emergency backup for the emergency backup. At that point, confusion replaced confidence. The station commander demanded answers. Nobody possessed any. 100 kilometers away, Elias moved through an abandoned maintenance tunnel. He never looked back. The relay had served its purpose. The defenders simply didn't know it yet. The second incident happened 47 minutes later. A surveillance grid covering an entire continent suddenly went dark. Operators scrambled. Diagnostics revealed conflicting data. Some systems appeared functional. Others reported catastrophic failures. The contradiction made no sense. Engineers argued. Supervisors shouted. Investigations launched. The confusion consumed hundreds of personnel. Exactly as intended. Hours passed. Then more systems failed. Power substations. Sensor arrays. Communications hubs. Logistics centers. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Each problem seemed minor. Manageable. Unrelated. Yet together they formed a growing pattern. A pattern nobody recognized. Not yet. Deep inside the planetary command complex, General Threx reviewed the reports. The massive alien commander towered above his officers. Decades of military service had earned him a reputation for discipline and intelligence. He disliked surprises. Unfortunately, surprises were multiplying. "Show me everything." A tactical officer obeyed. Hundreds of alerts filled the display. The general frowned. Sabotage? Possibly. By whom? Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. There were no infiltrator sightings. No detected landings. No captured agents. Nothing. Only failures. The lack of explanation disturbed him more than the failures themselves. Meanwhile, aboard the prison vessel Iron Revenant, Lyra sensed the change immediately. The guards looked terrified. More terrified than before. Emergency orders flooded communications channels. Security levels increased. Additional checkpoints appeared. Officers rushed through corridors carrying weapons. Something was happening. Something significant. One nervous guard accidentally left a terminal visible near her cell. She caught a glimpse of the display. Multiple security incidents. Infrastructure failures. Communications disruptions. The list continued. The pattern felt strangely familiar. For reasons she couldn't explain, she immediately thought of Elias. The fortress world entered its second day of chaos. Then the explosions began. Small ones at first. A fuel depot. A communications node. A sensor station. Nothing large enough to threaten the planet. Large enough to create panic. Large enough to stretch security forces. Large enough to force redeployments. The defenders reacted exactly as Elias expected. That was the frightening part. He wasn't improvising. He was predicting. Every response. Every movement. Every decision. Years of experience transformed military organizations into equations. And Vakesh kept solving itself exactly the way he anticipated. General Threx finally lost patience. The command chamber erupted with frustration. "I want the infiltrator found." His officers exchanged uncertain looks. "Sir." The general turned. "What?" The officer swallowed. "We don't know how many infiltrators exist." The room fell silent. Because nobody actually knew. A team. A platoon. A special operations unit. An entire covert force. The scale of disruption suggested significant numbers. The alternative sounded ridiculous. One officer finally voiced the possibility. No single operative could cause this level of damage. Several commanders nodded immediately. The statement felt reasonable. Comforting. Logical. Unfortunately, it was wrong. The realization arrived 12 hours later. Security footage from dozens of incidents underwent cross-analysis. Artificial intelligence systems compared movement patterns, physical characteristics, timing, behavior. The results appeared. Then appeared again. Then again. The same figure. The same human. The same face. Everywhere. The room became silent. General Threx stared at the report. His tactical officer looked physically ill. The general slowly reread the findings. One infiltrator. One. The word refused to make sense. Thousands of soldiers. Entire military installations. Planetary defenses. And somehow, one man. Fear spread faster than any virus. Once the truth emerged, defenders began seeing him everywhere. Every shadow became suspicious. Every alarm became personal. Every power failure felt deliberate. The fortress world slowly transformed into a nightmare. Not because Elias was everywhere. Because nobody knew where he was. 3 nights after arriving on Vakesh, Elias finally reached the prison sector. The journey had cost him bruises, blood, exhaustion. The defenders were becoming more alert, more dangerous, more desperate. But he was close now. Very close. The prison block stretched beneath a heavily fortified military compound. Multiple security doors protected the lower levels. Most remained locked. Not for Elias. One by one, barriers opened. Sensors died. Security systems failed. Until finally, a final door slid aside. The corridor beyond stood empty. Silent. Cold. Rows of containment cells stretched into darkness. Elias moved forward. Heart steady. Mind focused. The search ended at cell 117. Princess Lyra sat inside. Alive. Relief hit him unexpectedly hard. For a brief moment, the relentless hunter vanished. The tutor returned. The protector returned. The man who had promised himself he would bring her home returned. Lyra looked up. Disbelief filled her eyes. Elias. The door unlocked. Slowly. Quietly. Then another voice echoed through the prison block. Calm. Patient. Waiting. A voice neither of them had expected. Commander Ward. Elias stopped. Every instinct immediately activated. The atmosphere changed.
Danger.
Real danger. Not soldiers. Not guards. Not mercenaries. Something worse. Someone who had been expecting him. Someone who understood exactly who he was. Elias turned and saw the mastermind waiting. The prison block became silent. Not ordinary silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that existed moments before disaster. Lyra stood inside her cell staring at Elias. Elias stood in the corridor staring at the newcomer. And the stranger smiled. A calm smile. A confident smile. The smile of someone who believed victory was already secured. Behind him stood heavily armored soldiers. Elite troops. Not mercenaries. Not pirates.
Professionals.
The true architects of the conspiracy. The mastermind slowly stepped forward. Tall. Elegant. Dressed in the formal uniform of a senior intelligence official. The insignia upon his collar immediately identified him. High Director Kayla. One of the most powerful figures within the rival empire. The man responsible for destabilization campaigns across half the galaxy. The man who had engineered the kidnapping. The man who had started all of this. Commander Ward. His voice echoed softly through the corridor. I've wanted to meet you for many years. Elias said nothing. Kayla's smile widened. Although I confess, I expected you sooner. Lyra felt tension radiating from every soldier in the room. Not confidence. Tension. Even fear. The elite troops held their weapons tightly. Eyes fixed on Elias. Watching. Waiting. Prepared. The realization struck her immediately. Even these soldiers feared him. Kayla gestured toward the prison complex around them. You've exceeded every projection. His tone sounded almost admiring. Thousands of troops. A pause. Entire military sectors. Another pause. 3 command centers. His smile faded slightly. And you accomplished all of it alone. Lyra glanced toward Elias. The human remained motionless. Expression unreadable. Yet she could feel something changing. The same thing she had sensed after the kidnapping. The same thing that had terrified hardened mercenaries. Cold focus. Absolute focus. Kayla sighed. Do you know what fascinates me about humans? No response. The mastermind continued anyway. Every species assumes power comes from biology. He began pacing slowly. Strength. A soldier shifted nervously. Speed. Another looked away. Natural weapons. Kayla shook his head. They're all wrong. The prison block remained silent. Only distant alarms echoed somewhere beyond the facility. The fortress world was still unraveling. Still dying. Still collapsing beneath the weight of one relentless human. Kayla stopped walking. Then looked directly at Lyra. You want to know why humanity frightens governments? Lyra didn't answer. She wasn't sure she wanted the answer. The mastermind smiled sadly. Because humans adopt. Confusion flickered across her face. What?
Humans adopt.
His gaze shifted toward Elias. Friends. Partners. Comrades. Students. Families. The words hung in the air. Kayla's voice grew quieter, more serious. They choose people. The prison block felt colder. Then they protect those people with terrifying determination. No one laughed. Not even the soldiers. Because every person present understood something. Kayla wasn't insulting humanity. He was warning them about it. The mastermind slowly approached the cell. His eyes never left Elias. Other species prioritize survival. He tapped the prison bars.
Humans prioritis avalunging.
Another step. Once a human decides someone matters. His smile disappeared completely. Logic stops being relevant. For the first time, Elias spoke. A single sentence. Quiet. Controlled. Dangerous. Open the cell. Kayla ignored him. That's why your species wins impossible wars. The mastermind sounded almost respectful. Not because humans are stronger. No. Not because they're smarter. No. Not because they're fearless. A faint laugh escaped him. You're absolutely terrified half the time. Several soldiers looked confused. Kayla pointed directly at Elias. But you move forward anyway. The alarms suddenly intensified. Red emergency lights flooded the prison block. Somewhere above them, explosions shook the facility. Dust drifted from the ceiling. One officer activated a communications channel. His face immediately lost color. Director. Kayla didn't look away from Elias. What? The defense grid is failing. A pause. How much? The officer swallowed. Most of it. Fear rippled through the soldiers. The fortress world was dying. Not eventually. Now. At this moment. One man had crippled an entire planetary defense network. And he was standing directly in front of them. Kayla finally nodded. As though accepting something. A truth. A reality. An outcome he had always known was possible. Then he looked toward Lyra. You still don't understand. The princess stared back. What? The mastermind smiled sadly. You're not important because you're a princess. Confusion flickered across her face. Then why? Kayla's answer arrived immediately. Because you're his daughter. The world stopped. Not literally. But for Lyra, it felt that way. The words struck harder than any weapon. Daughter. The memory of the archive photograph flashed through her mind. The child sitting on Elias's shoulders. The family he lost. The grief hidden behind his eyes. The lessons. The patience. The concern. The protection. Everything suddenly made sense. Every moment. Every conversation. Every lesson beneath the garden trees. Elias had never treated her like a future empress. He had treated her like someone precious. Someone worth saving. Someone worth teaching. Someone worth protecting. Her eyes slowly shifted toward him. For the first time since her captivity began, she saw genuine pain inside his expression. Not rage. Pain. Old pain. The kind that never truly healed. Kayla saw it too. And smiled. There it is. The mastermind nodded softly. The real reason. His gaze hardened. We studied your military history for decades, Commander. Another explosion rocked the prison block. We analyzed every campaign. More alarms. We examined every victory. The soldiers tightened their grips. But we misunderstood the source. Kayla's eyes narrowed. We thought humanity's greatest weapon was its military. A slow shake of the head. It wasn't. His voice became almost a whisper. It was love. The shooting started an instant later. Not from Elias. From the soldiers. They opened fire simultaneously. Plasma bolts flooded the corridor. The prison block erupted into chaos. Elias moved before the first shot reached Lyra. Not because he was faster than physics. Because he had anticipated the attack. His body slammed into the cell doorway.
A portable shield déployé.
Energy impacts exploded against its surface. The corridor transformed into a battlefield. Elite troops advanced. Elias counted. Every movement precise. Every shot deliberate. Every decision calculated. The soldiers possessed numbers. Training. Firepower. Elias possessed experience. Years of experience. Decades of sacrifice. And something even stronger. Purpose. The fight spread throughout the prison complex. Explosions shattered walls. Emergency systems failed. The entire facility began collapsing. Yet somehow Elias continued advancing. Toward Lyra. Toward freedom. Toward the only objective that mattered. He absorbed wounds. Ignored injuries. Accepted risks no rational person would accept. Because rationality no longer mattered. Kayla had been right. Once humans chose family, everything else became secondary. Finally the cell opened. The barrier dissolved. Lyra stepped forward. Elias, he grabbed her shoulder. Checking injuries. Confirming she was alive. Safe. Real. For one brief moment the battlefield vanished. Teacher and student. Protector and protected. Nothing else. Then another explosion shook the structure. Reality returned. The facility was collapsing. Enemy reinforcements were arriving. Escape windows were closing. Time was running out. Elias looked toward the extraction route. Then toward the approaching soldiers. Then toward Lyra. A calculation formed instantly. Cold. Precise. Unavoidable. There was only one way to guarantee her survival. Only one. And the moment he reached that conclusion, Lyra saw something terrifying in his eyes. Acceptance. Not defeat. Sacrifice. The same lesson he had taught beneath the garden trees. Leadership means investing in something you'll never live to see. For the first time, she understood what he meant. Because Elias Ward had just chosen certain death to guarantee her escape. The battle for Varkesh ended in fire. Not the glorious fire celebrated in military histories. Not the triumphant fire of conquest. The fire of collapse. The fire of a conspiracy finally consuming itself. Across the fortress world, command networks failed. Defense systems shut down. Hidden alliances were exposed. Arrests spread through governments, corporations, military commands, and intelligence agencies. The kidnapping that had begun as a secret operation ended as one of the largest political scandals in galactic history. And at the center of it all stood a single exhausted human. Elias Ward survived. Barely. When Imperial rescue forces finally reached the prison complex, they found him unconscious beside the extraction shuttle. Bleeding. Burned. Broken. Yet still positioned between Lyra and the direction of the enemy advance. Even unconscious, he had fallen protecting her. The sight left veteran soldiers speechless. Months later, the Aurelian capital erupted in celebration. Princess Lyra had returned home. The Empire had survived. The conspiracy had failed. For the first time in generations, billions filled the streets. Flags covered cities. Ships illuminated the skies. Entire worlds celebrated. Yet the largest crowd gathered for a different reason. They wanted to see the human. The tutor. The warrior. The man who crossed half the galaxy alone. The man who challenged a fortress world. The man who refused to abandon a single student. The imperial palace offered him everything. Titles. Wealth. Land. Military command. Personal honors rarely granted even to royalty. Emperor Valen personally delivered the offers. You have earned all of this. Elias looked at the documents. Then quietly pushed them back. The Emperor blinked. You are refusing? A faint smile appeared. Yes. The surrounding officials stared in disbelief. One advisor finally spoke. Why? The question seemed to genuinely surprise him. Why? As though the answer should have been obvious. Elias glanced toward the palace gardens beyond the window. Toward the place where lessons once took place beneath sunlight and trees. Then he answered. Saving lives is important. The room listened carefully. But saving lives isn't enough. Silence followed. Elias's voice remained calm. The goal is helping people become the kind of people worth saving. The words settled over the chamber. Simple. Yet somehow more powerful than every military report they had read about him. Because for the first time they understood. The warrior had never been the real man. The teacher was. News of his actions spread throughout known space. Military academies studied his campaigns. Governments analyzed his operations. Criminal organizations quietly erased old records. But the greatest lesson wasn't tactical. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't military. The galaxy finally understood why humans frightened their enemies. Not because humans were stronger. Not because they were faster. Not because they possessed superior technology. Humans were feared because they cared, because they formed bonds, because they chose family, and because once they chose someone as their own, there was no force in existence capable of making them stop. For many species, that realization proved more terrifying than any weapon. For others, it proved inspiring. A year later, students once again filled a classroom inside the palace. The room looked ordinary. The teacher looked ordinary. A soft-spoken human standing beside a lesson display. Nothing about him suggested legends. Nothing suggested wars. Nothing suggested fortress worlds. The students only saw a teacher. Elias preferred it that way. And somewhere in the back of the room sat Princess Lyra. No longer avoiding lessons. No longer mocking tutors. No longer running from responsibility. She listened carefully now, because she finally understood the value of every lesson he taught. Leadership, sacrifice, responsibility, hope, the lessons that had saved an empire. Years passed. The galaxy changed. Empires rose. Conflicts ended. New generations emerged. And eventually, Princess Lyra ascended the throne. The day she became empress, representatives from thousands of worlds gathered to witness history. Her first official decree surprised everyone. Some expected military reforms. Others expected political announcements. Instead, the new empress stood before the galaxy and issued a different command. A monument would be constructed. Not for a king. Not for a conqueror. Not for a war hero. For a teacher. For the human who taught an empire what leadership truly meant. For the man who proved that compassion and courage were not opposites. For the tutor who showed the galaxy humanity's greatest strength. As the decree echoed across countless worlds, Lyra smiled. Because she knew something most of the galaxy never would. The greatest lesson Elias Ward ever taught had nothing to do with war. Nothing to do with victory. Nothing to do with power. It was far simpler than that. The strongest people are not those who can destroy worlds. They are those willing to protect one person when nobody else can. And that lesson would guide an empire for generations.